Our concern is to be always an innovative institution, both for our students and for society in general. The webinars offered daily by the schools and units of FGV are a way to promote the exchange of knowledge in many different areas about relevant and current topics, information, research, diversity of ideas, high-level debate. All these happening in a free, online, and daily manner. Welcome to one more FGV webinar. The broadcast is about to begin. The statements expressed by Getulio Vargas Foundation employee and guests who take part in online events and broadcasts exclusively represent their opinions and not necessarily institutional position of FGV. Good morning, everyone who is watching us from Brazil, and good evening to those who are watching from China. My name is Luis Augusto de Castro Neves, President of the Commercial Board of Brazil-China, and I would like to welcome those who are following the fourth seminar Brazil-China with the topic Brazil and China Belt and Road, Rules and Coordination of Policies. This event organized by the study group Brazil-China of FGV Law School in partnership with the Embassy of the Popular Republic of China, People's Republic of China, and Kincaid at Law, and with the support of Brazil-China Trade Commerce. This panel today is building better connectivity through the new infrastructure, and we have the participation of Patricia Sampaio, Professor of Administrative Law of FGV Law, Jiao Jianqiang, CEO and President of the Administrative Board of China Three Gorges Corporation, CTG Brazil, Francisco Queiroz Cavalcante, Professor and Director of the Recife Law School, and Sheng Li Tong, Senior Partners of Denton's Law Firm. Before we start, we have a disclaimer to read, and I ask you and the other panelists to sign their agreement. The statements expressed by the employees and guests of Getulio Vargas Foundation who take part in the online events and broadcasts exclusively represent their opinions and not necessarily FGV's institutional position. We also reiterate that everyone present here spontaneously agreed to participate in this event out of their own free will, and they consented to be recorded in this broadcast, which will be available later on FGV's official channels. In order to continue with this broadcast, we ask you to verbally express your agreement or sign your agreement with this sign, thumbs up here. Thank you very much, everyone. Now I'll pass the floor to Professor Patricia Sampaio. I remind you that you have 15 minutes for your presentation. Patricia, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. First, I would like to start greeting my fellow panelists, Professor Francisco Queiroz, Dr. Jiao Jianqiang, Professor and Ambassador Luis Augusto de Castro Neves, and Dr. Sheng Li Tong. And our special greeting to Professor Evandro Menezes, who has all the effort in relevant work to come closer, to bring together the academia of Brazil and China. And I've been following his work for longer than we would like to confess. And it is a pleasure to see the protagonism that his work and the study that he has developing is performing in this approach, both in the academic sector and the market and the companies. So I'm going to ask your permission to share a few slides with you that allows us to design a scenario for a debate about opportunities of bringing both countries together. I'm going to talk about the recent experience in Brazil with infrastructure. That is the topic that I dedicate myself, especially in our postgraduate studies here in the rules of regulation. And the summary that I proposed here to our dialogue starts with an idea that was brought to this topic that inspires us today, that is the issue of connectivity. And I would like to start from the point that more and more it is a thin line, and this line is almost non-existent, that separates the physical and the digital. So when we think about connectivity, when we think about infrastructure, more and more the physical infrastructures as railways, roadways, ports, and energy, they depend on technology, they depend on data, depend on technological evolution in order to generate efficiency, to be able to increase efficiency. And this point is a very relevant topic for the work of the academic sector, in which the markets and the Chinese technology has been developing a relevant role. So we less and less has two different worlds, but we have one world that connects to each other, and one cannot live without the other. And in this technological evolution, what we followed in this infrastructure sector, there is no doubt that the private capital will be essential and has been essential and will be even more essential as an investment driver in Brazil. And the Chinese market has been an important protagonist. I will bring some data that illustrates the role of the Chinese market, that the Chinese market is playing along with the Brazilian infrastructure and the opportunity that we have to create this exchange. This opportunity is always related to a reform agenda that Brazil has been adopting recently with important legislative modifications in our infrastructure scenario. So starting from our diagnosis, I would like to say that in this context of Latin American and Caribbean, that data from the Inter-American Development Bank shows that our country, Brazil, is not well positioned related to the other peers when we talk about investment in infrastructure as the percentage of the GDP. So this is a diagnosis when we see that our bar in the graph is lower than the average in Latin America and Caribbean. That shows us a gap of historical investments, but also tells us about the opportunity to private investments so they can increase. So we have a continental dimension country and we need profoundly investments in its transportation infrastructure, in the energy transportation, in the telecommunications infrastructures. And this is very evident when we look at the data of the World Economic Forum. This is the data pre-COVID. So that shows that in a ranking of 171 countries, Brazil is in the 71st position in the overall score of competitiveness. However, our infrastructure was drawing our grade down. We were only the 78th position. That if it somehow shows the absence of investments, sufficient investments, it shows us a new opportunity of investments. That shows the potential of the Brazilian markets and the necessities of the Brazilian society for the development of infrastructure. And in this context, we need to say that China has been a protagonist and a partner of Brazil in the development of investments in infrastructure. So these are recent data disclosed by the Brazilian press. This is the news from the August of 2021, showing that the Chinese companies have invested in these 14 years around 176 projects in Brazil, and Brazil was the destination of 47% of all the Chinese investments in Latin America, showing that the prestige that the Brazilian market has been receiving from China. These investments add up to $66 billion, out of which 76% were directed to the electric energy sector and the oil and gas sector. So we are not concentrating these investments in the energy and oil, and China is a major player in the Brazilian energy market, but it shows the opportunity to diversify these investments in other markets that seems to me that are more promising in our Brazilian reality. So in order to talk about the context in which Brazil is going through right now in terms of infrastructure, it seems to me that it's extremely relevant to highlight three laws, one approved last year and two this year. The regulatory framework of the sanitation that was approved in 2020 that opens a market that was practically closed, that almost all based in the state-owned company with some exceptions. Now this is a market that is being open to a model of regulation that will rely on the concessions as a model of development, opening the opportunities of new markets, new businesses. Our natural gas sector is historically an integrated sector, it is going to be open for many different contexts with a new regulatory framework and the new regulatory framework of the natural gas. Now this is being open to a new opportunity of more competitiveness and more investments in all the sectors and investments in this industry. Recently, we have approved in the National Congress a law that deals with the concession of roadways, opening new ways for the installations of the free passage systems. So these are the systems where the toll booths are not being charged traditionally in the toll booths, in the toll stations, but through a measurement, an electronic measurement that makes it closer to the reality that the user can pay for what they can consume in that roadway, in the chunk that they drive. So recently, this is a more technological advancements in our legislation about the free flow of the roadways. And we also have a set of modifications in the legislation that are in the advanced stage in the National Congress. So we have the proposal to change the regulatory framework of the electric sector to have a more opening for the retail and for the distribution to the competition. We have a proposal of the postal service reform before, besides dealing with the statization of the state-owned company, it has to do with the technological advancements and the necessity that the Brazilian society is having to rethink the future of the postal service. And in these markets that is more and more connected, in this society that is more and more reliant of information flow and goods flow. So we are having a proposal to reform this postal service that is very relevant. The other relevant proposal is what we call BR from the ocean, that is a regulation of the navigation, proposing more competitiveness in this the navigation, especially in the cabotage sector, and the discussion about the railway sector regulatory framework that started in 2018, but it had some amendments and some changes in October of 2021 with the approval of a substitution that in parallel, currently it has a provisional measure that is enacted. Of course, we can have one or another criticism or one or the other mention that these regulatory frameworks propose, but the message that I want to convey is that this is a country that is trying to equalize the infrastructure sectors, and with this, they're opening new opportunities of businesses because we are a country to that diagnoses that we need more investments in infrastructure. So with this, we see new opportunities, new railways, both in the traditional concession model and in a new innovative model that is being discussed in the National Congress. There is the possibility to have railways duly authorized, new port terminals being bid, and this is a model that is very well known in the country of privatization of ports, and it has a new proposal of the federal government of an important innovation that would be the concession and the admission of private investments in the port administrations. These are the ones that historically are governed by state-owned companies and by the docks companies. So we have a permanent programs of railways concessions. We have the growth of the electric sectors, and China is already a protagonist in the Brazilian reality, and the market that is going to be open in the sanitation business that is in the reform of 2020. So just to show you an illustration of some data of the potential that we still have for investments in infrastructure in the country, I would like to call your attention about the transportation of cargo, the matrix of transportation of cargo, and shows that the railway sector in Brazil responds for only 15% of the cargo transportation, although Brazil has a continental dimension. So it seems that in this aspect, we have a lot to learn from China, where the railway sector is responsible for 37%. So these are data from the National Association of Railway Transportation. In the same way, whereas Brazil has only a density of 3.4 kilometers of railways to every 1,000 square kilometers of territory, Brazil has a density of 13.2. Again, it shows that we have a huge potential to have an exchange in this relevant sector for the Brazilian exports, and the logistics between railways and the port has the potential to generate more efficiency for the Brazilian exports, and being known all the relevant role that the Chinese market has for Brazil in terms of exports. The same way, I'm going to give you the sanitation data from the National Information System. It shows that 83% of the Brazilian population has access to drinkable water, but we know that this network is intermittent and many times it can have some issues with quality of the water, as we faced here in Rio in the recent past. But more serious is the population of the sanitation sewage. Only 54% of the population has the sewage treatment stations. So that allowed, and a smaller percentage receives the possibility of treatment of this sewage. So the reform of 2020 associated with a program of the municipalities and the metropolitan regions to attract private investments in terms of sanitation also brings us a huge opportunity of businesses. And finally, talking about the electric energy sector, this is a sector that we have private investments for a long time and a very relevant role of the Chinese companies. We have a challenge as a country for the next 10 years to increase our capacity to generate electricity in terms of 43%. In this chart, the blue line shows the forecast of the growth of the country between 2019 and 2029 before COVID-19. So this national energy plan after COVID, that is the yellow line, also shows us that after the drop what we had in 2020, there is a recovery of the sector, and this recovery is growing, reaching 43% of increase of demand expected for the next 10 years. So these are some of the opportunities of investments that we have, and these investments are essential. The connectivity of our country, not only within our country, but our country with China, especially through the new Silk route. And with these opportunities, I would like to thank you for the attention and for the opportunity to bring you new information about what I envision in terms of many possibilities of investments and partnership between Brazil and China. And I will be available for any questions later or any possibility for us to evolve in this debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Your presentation was extremely clear. Now I take the liberty to complement what Patricia has talked about by mentioning the communication between the Business Council of China about the Chinese investments in Brazil from 2007 to 2020. All the investment made and the investment announced and confirmed this communication, which is here, which can be found on the website. Having said that, I give the floor to Dr. Zhao. Zhao, you have the floor.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. And
All right.
I'm very glad to meet all the panelists. Thank you for the host. It's my honor to present the fourth China Brazilian Della Belt and Road event. Let me share my screen for the presentation. Okay. And so first, let me give you some idea of our cooperation. CTG Group is the largest hydropower enterprise in the world, and also the largest clean energy group in China. And you know, we CTG Group started the business from the beginning of commencing the construction of 3 gorges project. And after that, we developed several gigantic hydropower in the upreach of the Yangtze River. So CTG Group has 2 kinds of major business. The first one is clean energy generation. That means hydropower and renewable wind and solar. The total installed capacity is around 140 gigawatt in operation and also in construction. And several years ago, we started a new business that is environmental protection. You know, after construction for the hydropower for many years along the Yangtze River, we have the new mission to protect the Yangtze River. So this is another new business. Up to now, we have the more than 100 projects is carrying out, and the total investment for the environment protection is 100 billions RMB. And CTG Brazil started the business in 2013, and we start our business cooperate with CTG EDP Brazil in 2013, and after that we have several M&A. So that makes CTG Brazil has a quick development in Brazilian energy sector. So we can see this is a roadmap of CTG Brazil's development. And CTG Brazil present in the country as the second largest private energy generator in Brazil, and representing around 5% of the installed capacity. And our headquarters is in São Paulo, and we have 14 hydro power plants in Brazil, along in the middle of Brazil. You can see the map. We have the presence in 10 states in Brazil. And you may ask why we chose Brazil as the investment destination. I can share three major reasons for this. The first one, I think, because China and Brazil has a very good diplomatic relationship. So this makes it's a very solid foundation for our investment. And second, I think Brazil has the rich clean energy resources and the privileged electrical matrix, mainly hydropower, which correspond to more than 60% of the country's service. And our strength is hydropower. So this is the second reason. The third one, I think China and Brazil has very good mutual complementary effect. So this is the third reason we come here. And according to the experience in the past few years, I should say we also face some challenge in this sector. And as all you know, this year is a drought year. It is the worst hydrological situation in the last 91 years. And especially after we purchased the hydropower in Brazil, it is still in a drought period. I think the hydrological risk is a major risk we are facing. This is the first challenge. And the second challenge, in my understanding, right now, the percentage of the renewable resources is become higher and higher. It might compromise some grid stability because the renewable is not as stable as the conventional energy. So it is intermediate generation. So this is the second challenge. The third one, the hydropower in Brazil built in the last century. So most of the hydropower more than 50 years. So the aging equipment will make the availability lower than expected. So this is the third challenge we are facing. So after we acquire the hydropower, so we make a robust modernization plan to rehabilitate the machine. So the total investment for this modernization is more around 3 billion reals. It will take 8 to 10 years to finish the modernization. And so this is a very important modernization project. So it can help us to raise the availability. I think the major benefit and the positive result is following. It's improvement of the operation and the maintenance management with a high level of automation, efficiency, safety, and stability. And the reorganization of production management. So this is something we integrated from our subsidiary CYPC, which is the operational company for Three Gorges project. So we combine the integrate the experience from CYPC to Brazilian hydropower. So, and another one is we risk availability much higher than what we purchased before our M&A happened, and it also much higher than the market average. So the last one, we provide the reliable and robust clean energy supply for Brazilian energy sector. So, and from the very beginning, we have the localized operation, and we try to have the culture integration and the diversity. So in Brazil, we actively implement a localization strategy, making full use of the existing market advantage to drive the development of the whole value chain. And we also committed to fostering inclusive and diversity culture, promoting the cultural integration between China and Brazil to try to striving achieve a win-win cooperation on the larger scale hydropower. And we also seek to promote local employment and contribute to the long-term social economic development. And we are also paying more attention to the environment and the social activity, and also improve our governance. So this is you can say we invest a lot in environment and social. For example, in environment, we invest more than 22 million in the environment project in 2020, and also 2021. Similar in the social project. We are also engaged in the innovation for transformation. For example, we invest more than 24 million in R&D in 2020. So, and also we have right now we have 25 ongoing projects related to solar generation, electric mobility, the regulatory safety, and also among other fronts. We also have the very good partnership with the institutions that are referenced in the Brazilian innovation ecosystem, such as ACAT and the Sinai. And I wanted to discuss some consideration here with all the panelists, and to share my consideration. I think MRE mechanism is a very good mechanism created to share the hydrological risk reasonably. But after many years in a dry period, especially in 2021, we face a very serious hydrological situation. I think it is necessary to revise or to review the MRE mechanism, how to share the hydrological risk reasonably to make the investment company can afford for this risk. And the second, by improving the development of renewable energy, we can have a range of hydrological risk. So it is recommended to simplify the approval procedure for renewable energy project and strengthen the support for renewable energy project financing. Renewable play a very essential role in Brazilian market. So speed up this process is very important. As far as I know, to get the installation license for the renewable, it will take around 11 months or 1 year. So it seems too long. If it is possible to speed up this process, it will be perfect. And the third one is to mitigate the grid stability risk caused by the high percentage of renewable energy in the matrix. So one suggestion is to establish the relevant policy for investment of pump storage power station or some kind of other storage with differentiated on-peak and off-peak electricity price. Okay, so I think that's all what I like to share with all of you. I hope this cooperation is a way to prosper, share the future for the mankind. So thank you all for your attention.
Muito obrigado, Tchau.
Thank you very much, Zhao. Your presentation was extremely clear. And he mentioned a very important aspect that I think is very important, which is the Chinese investment in Brazil has been a long-term investment in terms of corporative investments, in terms of international market. It's important data, because in terms of Brazil, it means a challenge to have a long-term strategy of our relationships, Brazil-China relationships, to have this kind of perspective when we're talking about our relations. And I would also like to mention something that touches me personally. The first presentation by Zhao, the first slide, he showed the technical visitations that were made in the last century in order to, to learn what to do, which it was an important role that was played. And actually, I remember that clearly because I was a member of the board. So we used to welcome many delegations at the time. So anyways, now I give the floor to Professor Francisco Cavalcanti. Professor, please, you have the floor.
Bom, cumprimento.
Well, I would like to greet all that are present here. I think this seminar is extremely important, especially because we have positions here that are convergent partially. I would like to make some general considerations and then later about specific topics. In terms of Brazilian infrastructure, and Professor Marcos Nobreg in our doctorate, he talked about this. We have some concerns that are quite serious in general regulations in Brazil. The bad implementation of the model of agencies, which allows us to have parts that are not acting in an objective way in order to have the role they're supposed to. And actually in 97, my PhD thesis was specifically about this, but specifically about the regulations and infrastructure. There are some important agencies like one that is extremely important. And there's this other one that doesn't really act well, and there's the National Power Agency, Electric Agency. Now, about the politicization and the participation of these agencies in terms of the economy. Now, I would like to be more specific about the infrastructure. It's an important economic item in which Brazil has a chaotic structure. I used to be connected to the railway system as in a federal position, and my first professional activity in law was as an important position in that area. And I was in charge of the connection between the English Railway and the Northeast Railway, and I was always present towards the railway system in Brazil, which used to have 38 kilometers. And nowadays it just has a little bit over 27 kilometers, and around 5,000 are disactivated. There is only a small portion that is active. An interesting aspect is that this railway system, the general rule is that it's a railway system that focuses on export only. If you are talking about high load export to, for example, the port in Pernambuco, from there to Rio, it's not possible to be done through the railway system because there is not this connection. But if we're talking about cabotaging a different way, then there's also a very small portion of that working in the Brazilian territory. As the professor has said before, there is only 24% of our load that is transported by railway. Imagine in Russia, it's 81%, in Canada, 46%, in Australia, 43%, and in the US, 43%, and in China, 37%. So the investments in the railway system are scarce in Brazil, with some exceptions, with all the system in the northeast of Brazil was destroyed, and only the one company that was responsible for this system left only a small path from São Luís to Fortaleza active. And that is the same group that was responsible for the construction of one path that would lead from Piauí to Pernambuco and to other areas, for example, the port of Suape. There is only one small patch, and this business company has a melting company. So the public administrations of these concessions, they need to be better administrated, as they have not been working well. And there are 3 projects that we have been working on which is the export of our commodities, which is consolidating Brazil in the role of in playing a big role in economies. This is an important business model that is being implemented, where we have actually many disqualified employees. So we need to amplify to, and unfortunately, there's growing unemployment in this situation. The professor talked very well about the connectivity, the issue of connectivity, about the integration of means of communication, etc. So more and more, we have activities that are, from the most traditional ones, controlled by computer systems, all controlled by computers, which is generating a lot of unemployment. Imagine that in China, they maintain the rural labor in order to avoid unemployment. And here we're doing exactly the opposite. We have an aggressive economy that is generating a lot of unemployment, especially in the outskirts of cities. So it will generate more, this will generate more and more conflict, which is showing up in urban violence, etc. We have another very serious problem in terms of great investments. I know that China also has problems in terms of the environment, control of pollution. The situation doesn't work neither well here or there. The construction of the power plant. Well, I'm not going to get into the Chinese situation. I will focus on Brazil, where here we have a kind of an uncontrollable deforestation and preservation areas of the Amazon, in spite of having a legislation that people who don't know see it as an okay kind of legislation, but with many problems. In fact, there's no use having good legislation if the normatization and the responsible agencies like IBAMA, for example, that are being actually dissolved and dehydrated, really, and horrible environment deforestations and degradation of the environment in the Amazon, etc. So it's a great problem. It's a big problem we have here. So we need to invest more in the railway system in order to reduce all the damage and to look at the cost of highway transport. If you know about the transport of grains that are taken by big trucks, we know that there's a lot of cost that adds up to the highway system, and how that affects the financial return of the production. So it's quite complex. Another aspect I would like to talk about is something that the lady professor mentioned, which is about sea transport of loads in Brazil. If you compare to China, in 30 years, China was able to have a fleet, a merchant fleet that is splendid. China has a total of over 2,000 fleet of high load to transport its loads. In Brazil, we only have about 5 cabotage companies that are active, but for long distance, we have basically nothing. And the main transport company is actually Petrobras' oil and gas transport. So we focus more on import than export, if you observe that. the Brazilian cabotage system doesn't work well. This bill known this Brazilian bill has some positive aspects in terms of facilitating the utilization of foreign fleets in Brazil, which used to be reserved strictly to Brazilian companies. And all these ships are actually old, so it doesn't work so well. So maybe this is just one of the few things that I agree with the current government. I don't like the administration, but the administration of this kind of system is reasonable. The ships that navigate here, having anyways, this situation is complicated because of all the cost of the company. So it's an important point. Now, despite the serious corruption problem here, a few years ago, there was an effort to recreate a naval industry in Brazil. Here in Pernambuco, for example, there were two shipyards. We had the biggest two shipyards of the South Atlantic, and now they're closed, recovering from a corruption problem, and they will probably go bankrupt. So in the beginning, there were many difficulties in the implementation of these industrial units, because it would be, much cheaper than connecting with Korea or other countries than producing here. But if China had gone on that route, for example, the situation would have been different. I believe that an early open of market relationships, and if we reduce our market barriers, almost as if we were comparing the situation to the colonizers. I believe that we have not been going on a smart route. I believe that we would be able to compete with these foreign companies. Maybe some friends from university, they believe that I'm like a dinosaur because I believe we could have a more developed protection infrastructure, so we are able to grow instead of suffering the competition, the competition from Americans, the Chinese. So the integration is important, but we must ensure the possibility of growth of smaller companies. The electric sector, which has been explored by Chinese investors, this is quite worrying to me, including the project of disestatization of Petrobras is a project which in an auction, for example, will not pass on any kind of value to the Brazilian state. It will only become a controlling investor, and the control of Eletrobras will be acquired in the system by an extremely cheap cost than it actually should be. It's something similar to what we have stated when Vale was privatized. We would need a lot more time to talk about the privatization of Vale, but I believe it's important, this integration of Brazil and China, The investments are important. Long-term investments without Brazil, losing its condition of protagonist. It cannot lose that condition. So the international relations integration, our biggest integration is with China. And we need to look at this loss of control of the preservation of our sovereignty and our infrastructure, including transport, energy, power, ports, airports. So this is essential to preserve our sovereignty in terms of globalization that we must have. Brazil should, of course, integrate, but we should not just be a chess piece. We can be a relevant partner of China in a situation that is convenient for both parties, that we're not solely that we do not solely export meat, etc., and industrialized products, but that we have our power plants, our and ports and airports. They should not be in the hands of these companies. So I believe this is a counterpoint, but this is my position. We should not be juvenile enthusiasts of an integration. We should, but look at this as a senior. And remembering that all empires are empires. If you've read the book, The Prince by Machiavelli, it talks about how any great empire is not a non-profit organization or charity organization. So Brazil needs to have a partner position, but with great care about its sovereignty. That's what I have to say. Thank you.
Muito obrigado, professor Cavalcante.
Thank you very much, Professor Cavalcante. We'll pass the floor now to our last panelist, that is our Professor Chen Letong. Chen Letong, please, the floor is yours.
Pergunto se o Chen está nos escutando.
Is Chen listening to us?
The floor is yours, Chen.
Yes. Oh, thank you. I'm a lawyer, and certainly our topic is about infrastructure. So naturally, I would connect infrastructure with law. And what's the best connections in terms of infrastructure and the law? I have some bad news to tell. Infrastructure, to build up a infrastructure would generate a lot of carbon dioxide, right? They would generate a lot of emission and pollution, not only in China, but also in Brazil. What's then the solution? The solution is called carbon compliance. This conception could be quite new to a lot of you guys. However, carbon compliance is a methodology to control the emission and pollution so that the global warmth, the tendency of global warmth could be controlled, could be become slower and slower, and then the global warmth could be controlled to a degree which is acceptable to everyone living on the earth. So for carbon compliance, China set up some targets or some deadlines for two tasks. One task is about emission peak, right? Emission peak means by a certain time, the emission of the carbon dioxide and some other gases could be controlled to the degree the carbon commission or the emission or emission of carbon dioxide and some other gases could be reached the highest level, which is called an emission peak. And China sets the deadline for emission peak by 2030, which means by 2030, the emission from within China would reach the peak, would reach the peak, the highest point, right? Then from that very point, the emission would get down. And there's another phrase for carbon compliance, which is called carbon neutrality, right? What's it called, carbon neutrality? Carbon neutrality means all of the emission, for example, from China, would be neutralized to the effect that there would be no emission at all. It's hard to imagine how can a country go without an emission, right? Certainly, it's hard to imagine. However, there are a lot of technical ways to reduce emission or to reduce the emission to the effect that there would appear no emission at all, or we call it carbon neutrality. There are a lot of ways. For example, by taking state-of-the-art technology so that the emission would be reduced, or you can plant a tree or some trees, a lot of trees, right? Then a lot of trees could neutralize the effect of the emission of carbon dioxide. China set a deadline for carbon neutrality. The deadline is 2060, right? So what we lawyers can do then, what our lawyers compliance work for the clients, we have a lot of work to do. And first of all, we would help our clients to comply with laws on pollution and emission, right? To enhance the efficiency of the fuels, of the energy, right? So that they would reduce the emission and the pollution. As a effect, then China would meet the target of the emission peak by 2030, and to meet the target of carbon neutrality by 2060. So that's what a lawyer can do, right? Control emission and pollution so that to reach the target, then we help our clients to comply with the different kinds of laws, right? That's the task number one. Task number two, we could help our client to do carbon trading. Yeah, what's the carbon trading? You have some quota to for emission, right? If you emit less, then you can use the emission you discharge in the air to quote for some money. That's called a carbon trading, right? We would then help our clients to get compliant with laws, to pass the certification by some kind of certificate agency. Then they would have the certificate so that they could trade the emission, the reduced to discharge in the air, right? That's called a carbon trading. That's task number two. Task number three, we will help our clients not only comply with Chinese law to reach the target of emission peak and carbon neutrality, as you can still remember, we will have to help our clients to meet the requirements of some foreign jurisdictions, like the requirements from European countries, right? Because some foreign-oriented companies will have to do business in the international market. So to do the business in the international market, they will have to not only meet with the requirements from within China, but also requirements from within some other jurisdictions, right? For example, for an airliner, right, like Air China, right? By a certain time, they will have to meet the requirements, not only China, but also the requirements of European country, so that they can then fly into Europe, right? Otherwise, if you don't comply with European law, you may be barred from flying into a European country, right? So task number three, we will help our clients not only comply with Chinese law, but also some non-Chinese law, right? So that's the way I'm presenting today about infrastructure in connection with law. Yeah, that's called a carbon compliance. And I'm sure there are some kind of a carbon compliance requirements for Brazilian companies as well. I'm sure Brazil has set up its own deadlines for emission peak and carbon neutrality. And with developing countries can do something together to help our companies, not only in your own countries, right, but also meet the requirements from some other countries. That's what I want to say today. Thank you.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much, Professor Chen Litong, for your remarks. They were very specific, and I believe that they bring a lot of lights about the possible ways to be followed. Now we go to the question and answer session. We only have 2 questions from the Q&A session here at Zoom. And I will ask the first one. In the post-pandemic world, the new Silk Route should be, for the 21st century, the same weight that the Marshall Plan had in the 20th century. Although it was not created before the sanitary crisis, the Chinese initiative to invest strongly in infrastructure in the world has the potential to change the equilibrium of geopolitical forces, creating a new global model. As for what happens after the war in the United States? This is the question. Well, allow me to say something about these questions first. Of course, we have compared to the Belt and Road with the Marshall Plan in the US in 1945, but actually the Marshall Plan had an essentially political and strategic bias, or essentially political at that time. Whereas the Belt and Road has do have a political bias, but the strategy of Belt and Road is to create more connectivity between China and the other economies in the world, especially with the economies in the developing world that has some demand for investment. Unlike the Marshall Plan that started after the Second World War, when it was clear that the world was divided in two powers, the United States and the Soviet Union. And we also had the issue that the Western world, especially Europe, although the East also had Japan, they were destroyed because they were operating during the World War II. So the Marshall Plan had a fundamental role to rearm in terms of recomprising the Western world to face the challenge that was posed with the Soviet Union and the socialist bloc. So the Marshall Plan was a geostrategic play and not an economic plan. Although the economic recovery of the Western Europe and Japan has been essential for the development of the Cold War, but there was an immediate difference in the 40s and the 50s and for nowadays. In the 40s and 50s during the Cold War, there was a polarization between United States and Soviet Unions and their blocs, but there were no cooperation between United States and Soviet Union unless the agreements that the superpowers had to assure their status of superpower. Nowadays, for example, I ask if the United States and China, if they are creating a new Cold War. My perception is that they are not, because United States and China have a high operation economically and commercially and financially and technologically. So most of the big high-tech American companies have their platform in China, in manufacturing in China. And China, with their ships, is the biggest investor, especially through the purchase of American products, is the biggest foreign investors in the United States. And the United States is the big investors in China. So I see, although it has some similarities, I think that the new Belt and Road is not a Marshall Plan. It does not have this bias. But if you want to say something about your opinion about this, feel free. Especially if you want to answer the questions, I will ask you to be brief so we can remain in the time here. 3 minutes to each person.
Well, this is Henry. I assume Chinese Belt and Road Initiative is not something like ambitious Marshall Plan. Actually, by Belt and Road Initiative, China is doing business with business partners. Certainly, business include infrastructure building and something, and the normal buy and sell transactions. But I don't think China is economically enormous to play a role like a Marshall Plan did. Yeah, in short, I don't think there is a similarity between two projects.
Muito obrigado. Muito obrigado. Tenho aqui uma outra pergunta.
Thank you so much. There's another question here. We have a phrase in China that talks about an idea of infrastructure in the essence of. My question is, Brazilian governments that we know, each government has each principle of governance, its principle of governance. Would it advance projects of investment in Brazil? How do we solve that situation? The first question that comes to mind is one that I've mentioned here, which is what we need to do our homework. We need to have a long-term strategy with China. It's not just about using moments, connections of market to make loads of money without knowing that this could lead to another, a different issue in terms of time and space. China has realized this. Its business model has been based in spite of its and use of transport for the growth of of the Chinese economy. So anyways, this has allowed for China to depend a lot on world economy's performance. And actually, I used to live there in China at the time when the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences was thinking about new business models that were more resistant to eventual fluctuations of the economy and international economy. And it has strengthened the internal market and eliminate any kind of problems that arose from the economic development of urban centers. And on our side, we need to have a strategy that is more coherent and that is more focused on long-term for our international relations, but in particular for our international relations with our main commercial partner, trade partner, which is China today. So here I'm showing you this book from a year ago, this basis about strategy for long-term with China. This is extremely important, because it leads to the fact that our relations with China, there's a very important side that is for us, which is to know what do we want from China? How can we cooperate with China? And where is there more possibility for that on our side? I would like to add something else, which is the opening of the Brazilian economy, the level of this bigger or smaller. We have had a very successful process of industrialization based on protectionism. A barrier was created to protect the Brazilian market in terms of international relations, the reservation of market. Our last attempt was disastrous, which was in the IT sector, and for subsidies. And for that, we created the Bank of National Development. And today, this bank is a social development bank. This worked at first, but it has contributed greatly for our loss of competitiveness internationally. And today, to talk about protectionism in Brazil is to condemn Brazil, to doom it to being a peripheric economy, which is, we're trying to be as international as possible. And if we want to export more and diversify our export, we need to import more and diversify our imports. That is my perception. But anyways, I open the floor for whoever wants to add something. Very quickly, I believe that for each state, the long-term planning, we need to have institutions and instruments that allow us to plan long-term, because based on the planning of the country, we were able to get partnerships that have allowed us to go further. So the planning of our integrated logistic planning, Brazil has some difficulties, of course, historic, which is in planning long-term. So actually, we're doing a debate about administrative reforms, which is more focused on servers and remuneration, when we should actually be thinking more about institution for the 21st century and places where we could effectively have this long-term planning, which is what will allow us to advance our quality of education, our technological park, and to be able to get more partners in various sectors. So I would like to agree with this diagnosis of the difficulty, and it's not simple, to recognize that it's not simple, and that planning is a duty of every state, and from that, the partnerships are welcome. Thank you so much, Professor Patricia. I would like to complement by saying that, the planning in Brazil is very well developed in terms of development of planning, because in the last half a century, we have gone through many various challenges, but a renewable planning for sure. But a great problem of our planning is that we have problems with the ends and not the means. If we don't talk about the means, then because the definition of the means, well, the definition of the ends, everyone agrees with, making Brazil a more developed country, and to promote social justice. But the problem is to talk about the means, because many times we create means that are incompatible with the ends, that could be seen as populist or nationalist. So it's a great challenge that we have to make a speech about the means and not the ends. The floor is open once again. We have a few more minutes, so anyone who would like to speak, please do.
Senhor embaixador, eu vou fazer só uma pequena digressão a partir do comentário da professora.
I would like to comment on what the professor has talked about the project of the administrative reform. I was able to write a book about this, actually, and I was a guest at the Justice Commission. A problem of this project is that it wasn't just a project of, it was a project of the deconstruction of the administration, going back to a period where most positions, and actually the privatization of companies and the special commission, which was temporary contracts of 10 years, which is an aberration, and the privatization of almost all administration, with the exception of the exclusive activities of the state. So I just have this point to make. Thank you, Professor. Any other comments?
Okay, I have some comments. In terms of first question, Marshall Plan. First, I think the Belt and Road surely is different from Marshall Plan. And as a CTG Berlin, as a company, in this Belt and Road initiative, And I think our aim is to build a robust energy generation in Brazil. And we make a great effort to try to do that. We integrate the experience we earned in China and try to help our modernization project. You know, in Brazil, the hydropower built in the last century, most of them is more than 50, 60 years old. So, you know, the machine can only survive 30 or 40 years. After that, we need to replace or modernize, refurbish this machine. So this is the mutual supplementary. I think that's why we make use our experience and knowledge to help this energy. If without this modernization, I think the generation sector faces a big problem. I think it's commercial decision. It has not any kind of relationship with political interface, I think. And also, I'm very glad to see some transformation reform in Brazilian, either to simplify the taxi taxation or some provision, provide more opportunity to the investors. To, you know, CTG Brazil is a long-term investor. We have our plan is a long-term plan. We don't just to earn some money then go back, but we have a long-term plan. Right now, we also to look at the new opportunity. You know, after we have a quick development in Brazil in the last 8 years, we become the second largest energy producer, private producer in Brazil. But we have the long, ambitious plan to invest in the different business in the long term, to contribute for the generation sector, to make the generation reliable and robust, and try to integrate more experience we learned from China to adopt here. I think it will benefit for both sides. I'm very confident to that. You know, CTG just now, Professor Chen talked about the carbon neutralization. CTG group make the CTG Brazil has already make the carbon neutralization in 2020. We have already achieved this target. And the CTG group, as a big company, we set ambitious target ahead China's target. You know, in CTG group, we are going to reach the peak in 2023. We are going to do the carbon neutralization in 2030. So it's almost 30 years ahead of the government target. So I think this is my comments and also some reply to this question. Thank you.
Muito obrigado, Dr. Zhao, pelos seus comentários.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zhao. We are reaching the end of our event here. It was very useful, at least for me. And I had a final comment about that. That is the issue that was mentioned here. That is the mentioning of having a long-term strategy. At least, actually, we are not running infrastructures. We are running the next few years and the next generation of Brazilian and Chinese companies. In the beginning of next year, we will have a high-level meeting of the COSBAN, the high level of agreement and cooperation of Brazil and China that aims at defining the strategic parameters of the cooperation between Brazil and Chinese. This is a unique opportunity for the Brazilian side to know how to define clearly what they intend in their relationship with China. And it occurs to me a thought of when I was an ambassador of China from 2004 to 2008. Since I am the president of the Brazil-China board, my perception with all the contacts and negotiations that I had with the Chinese party is that the meetings that we had between Brazilian and Chinese, I perceived that the Chinese had a clear idea what they wanted from Brazil, what they could obtain from Brazil and what they could not obtain from Brazil. And the Brazilian side, unfortunately, our perception with our objectives with the relationship with China were less clear, so to speak. So I think that from our Brazilian side, it is important that we define what we want, what is our strategy for the relationship with China. It has been very positive and fruitful throughout these years. And today, China is our main commercial partner. And in terms of flow, in the last 10 years, this has been the main foreign investors. And if we analyze the investments in Brazil, as it was mentioned by Zhao and by Chen, these are long-term investments. These are not speculative investments, not taking advantage of momentaneous situations where the goods are cheaper or anything like that. And especially in the Brazilian policy, that means that today there are more specific rules, more strict rules for the Chinese investments in the Brazilian country. So this can not be a mere speculation that can be translated in a more connectivity or more binding of the Chinese economy with the rest of the worldwide economy. And in this regard, Brazil has an important role to play as long as we know how to define this role and the ways and the tools necessary to implement them. This is the comment that I had to finish the panel, and I want to thank the participation of all of you, especially I want to thank the Getulio Vargas Foundation and the Getulio Vargas Law School for this opportunity to hold this meeting between Brazilians and Chinese, and a very useful relationship both for China and for Brazil. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.